Upholding international law is also crucial, and to that end I hope the government will respect the ruling of the ICJ last week when it considers it.
Mr Speaker, the international rules-based system is the cornerstone of peace and security. When the Prime Minister talks of a ceasefire in Gaza and implication of the rule of law, what measures is he willing to take to make sure that's implemented?
He will know as well as I that those courts are only as good as the action and consequence that flows from their judgment. Without action and consequence, then their judgments just become hot air. So in relation to Israel-Gaza, and in particular the occupation of the West Bank, could he please assure us that he's considering hard consequences for the very obvious flagrant breach of international law that's taking place on a daily basis in that part of the world?
And if we are to follow the role of international law, whilst I'm pleased that he's called for a ceasefire in Gaza, surely it needs to go a bit further and call for the withdrawal of Israeli occupying forces in both Gaza and the West Bank, and an end to our complicity by the supplying of arms to Israel.
Order. Can I just gently say to Honourable Janta, I've got a lot more to get in as well.
The level of infiltration by Hamas into UNRWA is well documented. From UNRWA staff taking part in the pure evil that was the 7th of October attack, to UNRWA-funded schools being used to store weapons and harbour terrorists, to terror infrastructure being found under UNRWA's own headquarters in Gaza City. So can I ask the Prime Minister, before he took the decision to recommit UK taxpayers' money to UNRWA, what advice did he receive on that infiltration, and what steps has he demanded that UK taxpayers' money can never, ever be used to fund terror or preach hate?
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of the statement. Closer cooperation with our European neighbours is absolutely essential, whether it's Russia's illegal war against Ukraine or tackling the criminal gangs responsible for the small boats crisis, and I welcome the new government's change in approach on this. I also welcome, Mr Speaker, the new government's support for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Clearly, we need to put an end to the humanitarian devastation there, get the hostages home and open the door to a two-state solution. Upholding international law is also crucial, and to that end I hope the government will respect the ruling of the ICJ last week when it considers it. Coming on to the NATO summit. 70 years on from the foundation of NATO, the alliance has never been more relevant, and we support the NATO summit pledge of long-term security assistance for Ukraine, as well as increased support now to ensure she can resist Russia's attacks and liberate her territory. I am pleased that in this new Parliament, this House will continue to stand united behind the brave Ukrainians opposing Russia's illegal war, just as we've done together in recent years. But I hope that members of this House will not be complacent about the impact that the upcoming US elections could have on the security of not just the UK and our allies, but Ukraine too. We must hope that the leadership of President Biden continues with his successor, and I'd like to echo the Prime Minister's tribute to President Biden. But whatever happens in the US, part of the answer is for the UK and Europe to increase defence spending. The previous Conservative government has left a legacy of the smallest army since the age of Napoleon and played fast and loose with public money, making our shared ambition of 2.5% of GDP for defence spending a much more complicated route. And we look forward to the Chancellor Exchequer's plan. I hope that this government will start by reversing the planned cuts to the army of 10,000 troops. This is a vital first step. So will the Prime Minister reassure the House and the country that this will be a priority within the recently launched Strategic Defence Review? We also urge the government to move further and faster in taking steps to seize the frozen Russian assets, of which there are £20 billion worth on our shores and the same amount on the continent. I hope that he will recognise that we have an opportunity to lead within Europe on this vital issue. If the US cannot, Europe must.
Thank you very much. On the three issues, firstly, on the international court, we do respect the independence of the court and international law, and let me be very clear about that. I won't get tempted into questions about the US elections later this year, save to say that it will obviously be for the American people to decide who they want as their president, and as you would expect, we will work with whoever is the president after they've made their choice. On the question of troop numbers, I take the point about the low numbers of troops. That will be looked at in the strategic defence review that we're carrying out into threats, capability and resources. Thank you.
Stephen Giffins.
Mr Speaker, can I add my personal congratulations to the Prime Minister on his election win as well. Mr Speaker, the international rules-based system is the cornerstone of peace and security. When the Prime Minister talks of a ceasefire in Gaza and implication of the rule of law, what measures is he willing to take to make sure that's implemented? And furthermore, being outside the EU makes us less safe. The populists who want us to turn away from the EU and towards Trump-style isolationism are playing straight into Putin's hands. So what are we doing to get closer to the EU?
Hear, hear.
Well, on both those points, firstly, in relation to a ceasefire, obviously talks are underway at quite an advanced stage, and we have already urged all sides in the international discussions that I've had to move forward on a ceasefire, because without a ceasefire it's very difficult to envisage the circumstances in which further hostages can come out safely, aid can go in the scale that's desperately needed, but also a ceasefire can be a foot in the door for the beginning of a process, however remote it may seem at the moment, to a two-state solution. In relation to the EU, look, we've got a shared interest in safety and security with our EU allies, and that was very much the topic of discussion we had at the EPC summit last week.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has given us fine words about the importance of our membership of international institutions, and in particular international courts, and I agree with him. It's profoundly in our national interest that we're a member of these organisations. But he will know as well as I that those courts are only as good as the action and consequence that flows from their judgment. Without action and consequence, then their judgments just become hot air. So in relation to Israel-Gaza, and in particular the occupation of the West Bank, could he please assure us that he's considering hard consequences for the very obvious flagrant breach of international law that's taking place on a daily basis in that part of the world?
I'm grateful for that question, because I believe in international law, and I think it's very important that we keep to our commitments in international law. We're known for that as a nation, and it matters to the world. In relation to the courts, I respect their independence. Obviously, we will have robust discussion about the particular judgments or actions that they might publish and decisions that they come to. But it is important, if you believe in international law, to be equally clear that we support the independence of the courts. Without that anchor, then we do not have the framework that is so important to us in terms of enforcing international law. Thank you.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I congratulate the Prime Minister on the office he's achieved, and thank him for the statement he's given today, and I'm pleased with the decision to remain as part of the European Convention on Human Rights. In all the meetings he's had with both the EU and NATO, was the issue of global war considered? The issues not just of the wars in Ukraine and Palestine, but also in Sudan, in Congo and Yemen, and the possibilities of involving the UN much more in looking towards a more peaceful future rather than a continued greater expenditure on arms. And if we are to follow the role of international law, whilst I'm pleased that he's called for a ceasefire in Gaza, surely it needs to go a bit further and call for the withdrawal of Israeli occupying forces in both Gaza and the West Bank, and an end to our complicity by the supplying of arms to Israel.
Can I just gently say to Honourable Janta, I've got a lot more to get in as well. As important as his message is, I need to make others heard. Prime Minister.
Let me deal with both points. Firstly, in relation to conflict resolution, yes, that did come up, because we had a very full discussion about illegal migration, about the law enforcement aspect of it, as I've explained, but also about the root causes of migration, conflict, poverty and climate change being key among them. In relation to a ceasefire, look, the prospect of a ceasefire is there. I'm urging all parties to take that opportunity, which is an important foot in the door for the political process. that I believe is the only process that's going to bring about lasting peace and resolution in the Middle East, which is why it's so important.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The level of infiltration by Hamas into UNRWA is well documented. From UNRWA staff taking part in the pure evil that was the 7th of October attack, to UNRWA-funded schools being used to store weapons and harbour terrorists, to terror infrastructure being found under UNRWA's own headquarters in Gaza City. So can I ask the Prime Minister, before he took the decision to recommit UK taxpayers' money to UNRWA, what advice did he receive on that infiltration, and what steps has he demanded that UK taxpayers' money can never, ever be used to fund terror or preach hate?
Well, as the honourable member would expect, we took the most careful advice and subjected it to the most careful consideration, because we were concerned, as anyone in this House would be concerned, by the suggestions and allegations in relation to October the 7th. So we took that really carefully, very seriously, with the utmost consideration. There has, of course, been an independent review and steps put in place, but there is a vital role for UNRWA. Many other countries have restored funding for UNRWA. It is the right thing to do, but I can give an assurance that the most careful consideration was given before that step was taken, as the honourable member would have expected.
Oliver Ryan.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for the leadership that he's shown in his discussions at Blenheim, especially on NATO. I'm proud to see the Prime Minister recommit us to a two-state solution in the Middle East and to an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Does he agree with me that this conflict is urgent and dire, but needs sober and considerate solutions rather than extreme rhetoric from those who might seek to sow further divisions?
Yes, I do, and I'm grateful for that question, because there is the prospect of a ceasefire. It is desperately needed for the reasons we've already discussed. It will only happen if there's international agreement and a sober assessment that provides the framework for the remaining hostages to be released. I shudder to think of the state of some of them. For the aid desperately to be allowed in at the scale it's needed, and for beginning of the process, in my view, the only process that will lead to a lasting resolution of this awful conflict. And I think that it's all of our, not just interest, but duty to do everything we can to ensure that that comes about.
That completes the first statement. I'll let the front bench change over.